Welcome to Fiscal Integrity Group, your ticket to bookkeeping greatness. Hi, I'm Herb Holst. In this Knowledge Nugget, we're going to look at the importance of the engagement letter or contract, including a comprehensive set of terms and conditions. In just about every business transaction, there needs to be an upfront understanding of what each side is going to bring to the table, the rules of engagement, if you will. It encapsulates the duties and responsibilities of one party to another, and vice versa. That's why we have contracts, partnership agreements, shareholder agreements, etc. It's always better to hash this sort of thing out up front and in detail while everybody's still on great terms, so that if things do happen to fall off the rails or there is misunderstandings, then you can go back to this document and say, hey, this is what we all agreed to, and this is what we did when we were anticipating doing business with each other. So, trying to get the parties to come up with any kind of agreement after the fact when things have gone off the rails or when the acrimony is set in is virtually impossible. Lawyers always wind up winning in this kind of a situation, so let's try to avoid that by getting everything nailed down up front. Better to have it in place right from the start. That way there should be a clear understanding of what is about to happen and who's going to make it happen. As a bookkeeper, a freelance bookkeeper, or a contract bookkeeper, it's vitally important for you to have this kind of engagement letter or contract in place. It kind of relates back to the whole concept of being a contract bookkeeper. There you have it. Even staff bookkeepers would benefit from an employment letter that kind of outlines the duties and responsibilities that you would have to your employer, what kind of remunerations involved, benefit entitlement, that sort of thing. Again, another kind of a contract. For the freelancer contract bookkeeper, my approach has been to construct my quote and a detailed set of terms and conditions so that if it's acceptable, it can be signed and then it becomes the contract going forward. And again, that's how business starts with our new customers. In a moment, we'll go into my version of the quote/contract and the terms and conditions. But a few things before we do. Be aware that the so-called contract that I'm going to be showing you, first of all, is one that is generic and doesn't relate to any particular client that we have. Any similarities are strictly coincidence. Be aware that the document is not cast in stone until it's been signed by both parties. And if there is room for adjustment, and that's why it needs to be developed so that you get it right and that it's taking care of the needs both of yourself and of the client that you're looking to bring on board. You can resubmit it if necessary, and I'll show you how to do that. That's why it starts out as a quotation. It's important to get it right. Once you've got the signatures on it, it's really important as well that you keep copies in a safe place. Preferably a hard copy somewhere, in other words, a printout of the contract, and also an electronic copy that is in a place where you can retrieve it if the need should arise. For us, this is our backup and proof that what we have agreed to is right there, and that what they've signed on to backs that up. And if we don't agree with something, we can always go back and say, well, why'd you sign it in the first place? Okay, and they can do the same to us for that matter. In our experience, we have found it necessary to produce the document to validate our stance. It wasn't necessary a lot of the time. Most of our clients were really, really great and excellent to deal with, and right up front there was a clear understanding of what we were doing and how it needed to be done and what we needed from them as well. However, when humans interact and there are disagreements, there is the potential for disputes, and that's what you're trying to short circuit and make sure that it doesn't go too terribly far. A complete and well-constructed engagement letter will help resolve this before it does go too far. Well, with the exception of the terms and conditions at the end of the quotation, what I like to do is customize each quote to the client that I've just finished interviewing in order to get their business. Make it unique to their particular situation, and again, make sure that they are aware that I'm paying attention to them, because that's what I'm going to need to do anyways as we go down the road and accept them as a client. That being said, I do have some boilerplate stuff in my quotations that I'll show you. And what that does is it gets me started, keeps me focused, and makes sure that I don't miss anything. My advice is to modify any quotation to suit your client. Again, it shows that you're paying attention and that you care about them and their unique situation. Not all things apply to all customers. Be very careful to keep your spelling and grammar accurate as well. In a world, the bookkeeping world, where accuracy is everything, it starts right here. In other words, nothing could derail your chances of bringing on a client than sloppy spelling or grammar. You want to make sure that you show that you are paying attention to detail right from the get-go, and it starts right here. Let's take a look at my template and how I've used it to craft a quote. Please note that, again, I'll be using a generic fictional client, and that any similarities to any client that we've had in the past is strictly coincidence. Okay, away we go. So here we go with the quotation template before I actually start filling it in for any given client. We'll go through some of the highlights and the features very quickly just to let you know how I've done it. And again, you just need to adapt it to your particular situation and the kinds of things that you're looking to do with it. But regardless, here's some of the things that worked well for us. For starters, I always put it on company letterhead because eventually this will be saved as a PDF file, which can then in turn be sent to the prospective client, and then they can see it as it should look if it were printed out properly and mailed in an envelope. Anyway, starting off with, of course, our company letterhead, logo, and address and contact information. At this point in time, I'm calling it a quotation because it is indeed, at this stage, just a quotation. It doesn't convert to a contract until it's signed by all parties. Some standard stuff, a date, the person to whom this thing is going to go to, and the company that they're involved with, or the company you're going to be doing business with if it all goes well. It's from me, and in this case I've put it down as bookkeeping requirements. You can put it down as training, or you can fancy this up as you see fit. The quote number is something that is very important, at least in the way we've done it. It starts off with Q for quotation. 13 in this case is the year. The next two numbers would be the month, so 01 for January, 12 for December. And then the next two numbers are the number of quotes in the particular month. Now, I've never really done more than about 5 quotes in a month as well, so you can reduce that to one number if you wish. But again, that's something that you can decide as you go along. Now, the thing is, I save it by this quote number as well, which allows for easy retrieval by time anyways. So consider that. I save it as the quote number dash the customer's or the prospective customer's name. A little bit of introductory salutation. Now the next two lines in brackets are important because that's where you type in the bulk of your quotation meat, if you would. The first one's the type in the body of the quote. What I put in here is my synopsis of what I feel this particular application is all about based on my meeting with the prospective client, the notes that I have taken, and so on. And this allows me to basically regurgitate and show the client that I'm up to speed on what it is they need. Starting off now, in consideration of the above, we are pleased to quote as follows, and here's where I quote item by item the things that we're going to provide, and you'll see an example of that once I show you a quotation sample actually intended for a client or a prospective client. Now, the next bunch of paragraphs are stuff that I go over. Some of it I leave in, some of it I remove. It depends on the client and their needs as to whether or not you keep it. Now, this first paragraph right here, this one here, note that everything is included up to and including trial balance. In our case, we opted not to go with year-end taxes and that type of thing. So we take it up to trial balance, and then we would recommend if they need to, or let them take it to their own accountant of choice. Now, we do have some additional value-added services that we can include, like training or whatever. And again, we just note that that can be supplied for additional cost. If they haven't asked for that right now, but they may down the road, we just need to let them know that there are additional things available, and away we go. Now, the next paragraph, for catch-ups and cleanups, again, we're very, very adamant about taking a retainer up front and ongoing retainers in order to take on a project, depending on the size of it. Again, we could go ahead and do a lot of work, and we could pay our staff to do a lot of work, as it was in our case. And then if the customer all of a sudden decides to back out and we haven't got any money from them, we're out that money. So this is standard procedure for a lot of industry and business, is to have an upfront retainer and ongoing retainers as well for particularly large projects. Now, next paragraph. This one deals with clients that want to have a fixed price for budgeting purposes, which is certainly a noble intent on their part. But by the same token, we're just saying that we'd prefer to go with 3 months of hourly before we commit to a package fee, because again, at this stage of the game, although we know the parameters of the application, we really don't know what's coming down the pipe in terms of the amount of paperwork and what skeletons there may be, or things that we haven't taken into consideration. So we prefer not to give a fixed price, and that's part of what this paragraph is about. Now, again, we also ask that they submit payment by or have a credit card on file, so that we can bill them in the event that they're late with their paperwork. But again, we need to take care of things as well. So we just want to make sure that we're going to be able to do so. And if they're late with payments, that will not affect our efforts. Just moving down a little bit. Work will commence on receipt of the signed quotation and the appropriate fee. And now I put in the appropriate amount right here. Take a look right here, and this is going to be on the bottom of each of the pages, is a place for them to initial, indicating that they've read it and understood it. And this is put into the footer of the document, of the template, and it repeats itself on each page. And this is important as well, because they can't come back at you if you've insisted that they initial the pages and say, well, I didn't realize that that was going to be part of it. Well, you initialed the page where it's clearly stated, so there you go. Page 2 of a 4-page document is basically the ending of the quotation part of it, not including the terms and conditions, which follows on page 3 and 4. But again, if you notice that if you want to proceed with the transaction in this paragraph, that initial each page at the bottom and sign and date this document as indicated below, and then return it to us. And essentially this is now, if they do sign it, return it to us, that means that they've accepted it and we're good to go. Place for, of course, a signature, the printed name, the date, and again, we offer as a closing that if they have any questions, to please feel free to contact us, and we can rebuild this thing if necessary until it's in an acceptable form for both them and for us. Thank them, of course, for the opportunity, which it is at this stage of the game. And then, of course, you sign it, and the signed copy will have my actual signature, which is then converted to a PDF and faxed over to the client. Okay, now that's the template part of the document. Now we go to the terms and conditions. Notice again, placed for initials. And we have 2 pages of them, and it's very important for you to consider, because this has been developed over time. It was only about a page when we first started off our business, but we've grown it based on things that we found needed addressing, and as such, we felt it was important to make sure that it was as comprehensive as possible. And this is boilerplate. It doesn't change from quotation to quotation, so this is just something that you generate once when you're designing your template, and then it stays as part of the each quotation as it gets constructed and then sent out to the prospective client. Okay, just going to go over these points very quickly. For starters, the quotation is valid for 30 days from date of issue. You don't want it to drag on endlessly, or for somebody to bring back a quote that's years old and ask you to honor the pricing that you've set up and so on. So put it in writing. Our terms are due upon receipt. Now, again, we don't necessarily expect we're going to get paid as soon as we hand over the file or the statements or whatever for a particular time frame, but at least it starts the clock ticking so we can find out how long they've waited to pay us. Anyways, that's our terms. You can put in your own terms to suit. Payments and for catch-ups and cleanups. Again, I've addressed this before, but I reinforce it here in the terms and conditions that we need ongoing retainers and progress fees in order for us to be able to take on this project. Our payment terms, Visa, MasterCard, or check. And again, we ask them if we could have a credit card on file so that we can process their unpaid invoices after a certain period of time. And we use this for clients that are typically and chronically late with paying. Again, we quote our standard services, and extra services can be performed at a rate of so much per hour, and that additional distant charges may apply to those services if it's a client coming at us from far away. Again, this is just a decision that we've made. Okay, time for
Time for traveling to a client's site will be included and billed at the lowest rate. Now, if a client is not that far away, we don't really necessarily always enforce this one, but if we have to travel and be in traffic for any given length of time, that takes our time, and again, we could be applying that to other clients that we're doing work on that we can bill for. So travel time is important for any long-distance clients. Okay, we do have some mandatory extra charges for things like year-end reconciliation and for payroll for T4s and T4 summaries and that sort of thing. And again, we just want to make sure they're aware of it up front so that there's no surprises down the road. Meetings and phone calls, number 8, with Fiscal Integrity Group staff will be billed at a rate of so much per hour or part. Now here again, this is something we don't always enforce. As a matter of fact, we don't enforce it with the majority of our clients because they call us very infrequently, and it's with a legitimate question that can be taken care of quite quickly. There are, however, clients out there, and if you haven't found out already, you probably will, that think nothing of engaging you in numerous phone calls for all kinds of time, and sometimes at the oddest hours in the evenings and on weekends and that type of thing, and think nothing of it, but then are surprised as all get out when you bill them for it. Well, here again, it's your time, and if you're not busy answering or talking to them, you could be putting it towards other work that you could bill for. So it's for the time bandits, and you just want to make sure that you dissuade them. Now, number 9, clients or charges for no-show by clients. And again, that's happened as well, where we've gone out to meet with a client or to work with a client, and all of a sudden something has changed, and they've forgotten to notify us so that we didn't have to travel or go to them or whatever. Well, that's not fair, and we need to be able to charge for that. And yeah, we've had to use that a few times in our history, but again, for the most part, most people do respect your time. It's just that it needs to be in there just so that they know that it's not that they can blow us off for any given reason and then not expect to be billed for it. No, our time is valuable too. Now, package maintenance fees, number 10, are quoted based on your requirements. And again, this one is just that if we do quote a package fee for a client, if their business should experience a dramatic increase or decrease, either side needs to be able to come to the other side and say, okay, can we re-look at this thing and renegotiate it? And again, that's only fair as well. If the business increases, we can't offer to hold our line on pricing forever and ever. And similarly, if it decreases, they shouldn't have to pay for again, time that we don't need to really spend on their file because it's no longer as big a file. So in any case, either side can request a reevaluation. Number 11, accuracy of work by Fiscal Integrity Group is contingent on supply and disclosure of any and all relevant information. Well, we've had it in the past where we have done a file, thought it was complete, and then all of a sudden additional information was there, wasn't brought to our attention, and it changed the actual context of the work done, and that's not necessarily fair either. We need to be able to say, okay, well, you didn't show us that. It's not our responsibility. Where do we go from here? Okay, timing of work and reports and so on and so forth is contingent on timely submission by the client. And again, if we take a look of all relevant information, reports, invoices, and statements. Again, if they're going to come to us one day before, say, a tax remittance is due, we just don't have the time to now all of a sudden shoehorn their file in and get it done and ready in that kind of a timeline. So again, fair is fair. Get us the stuff in a timely fashion so that we can take care of it in a timely fashion and be ready for any deadlines, and that no penalties or interest will be charged to the client. Number 13, files inherited by our company. We do an integrity check on it, and we will charge for that. Now, in fairness, we just need to know that it isn't an absolute mess that we've inherited, because at times we have inherited files from other bookkeepers or bookkeeping companies because there's been a falling out or something has changed and we are taking over the file. Well, at that stage of the game, until we get the file on our computers, we don't know what the state of it is, and we need to do an integrity check to make sure that we're not inheriting a mess when it was presented to us as a nice clean file. 14, for catch-ups and cleanup work on client files, we don't assume responsibility for the integrity of information supplied by others. So again, if they messed up, we can clean it up and then it becomes our responsibility. But if we're told that this is clean up to a certain point, we're taking over from there, then we can't be held responsible for anything that wasn't clean up to that point. Okay, 15, Fiscal Integrity Group will not assume responsibility for the outcome of any audit. And again, this is only if it can be clearly proven that the problems were as a result of our work. If it's our work, we'll take responsibility for penalties and interest, but we won't take responsibility for paying taxes that should have been owing in the first place. That still is the responsibility of the business. Okay, and again, this is something that we've never had to enforce, but it's something that could potentially come down the pipe. So 16, Fiscal Integrity Group stresses that full supporting documentation should be supplied by the client. Now, this just goes on the premise here in Canada anyways that paperwork is still important. Paperwork doesn't just include statements, but actually includes original documentation like cash register receipts or any slips or invoices or what have you. They need to be kept for about 7 years. It's possible to keep them in electronic format, but here's the kick, here's the rub. In our case, it needs to be in a format that is still retrievable up to 7 years down the road. Now, I challenge anybody to try and find me a drive for, say, a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. Now, again, the way technology changes and the speed at which it changes, you just need to make sure that it hasn't changed out of your retrieval equipment for any given receipts or paperwork. So if you're going to save it electronically, keep whatever it takes to be able to retrieve it electronically. Okay. Number 17, just has to do with recommending that accurate vehicle driving logs be kept by all staff engaged for travel for a company. And again, it's required. Not a lot of people do it, but again, if they choose not to do it, it's not our responsibility. Now, 18 has to do with the storage of books and paperwork, and again, that's the client's responsibility. If we were to store everything for all of our clients, we'd be nothing but a big storage warehouse, and we just don't have the room for that, and that's not what they're paying us for. They're paying us for our work, not as a warehouse. So this one just takes care of that. Now, we recommend that certified accountants review and do the year-end work for clients. We don't do that, and we just make sure that they're aware that that is, again, our recommendation. Number 20. Fiscal Integrity Group will not be accountable for errors that result from incomplete, misleading, or incorrect information supplied by clients. We've had that happen, not often, of course, but again, we're just stating up front, that's not our problem, it's yours. Now, 21, event of termination of the contract, full payment is needed before the data file is handed over to the client. That's just our protection that if for whatever reason we want to terminate the contract, we still want payment for the work that we've done. That's only fair, and that's pretty standard. Now, 22, we're starting to get to the nitty-gritty end of it. Any mutually agreed to changes in the contract, the quotation or contract will not render the rest of it invalid. That's standard legalese, just to make sure that somebody can't say, well, we made a change, therefore the whole document's invalid. No, it's still valid. The change is good, but only the change. Okay, 23, Fiscal Integrity Group reserves the right to partially or fully implement any of the above items at its sole discretion to optimize its business relationship. Now, this is our sort of out for the fact that a lot of this stuff may seem very, very cut and dried and somewhat hard and maybe even considered by some to be unrealistic. But sometimes it has to be in place just for our protection, but not that we need to enforce it 100% of the time for every single client. So for a lot of our clients, we do supply a lot of leeway in the interest of keeping them as good clients. It's just that we need to be able to choose if we have to implement one of these things for a client that needs to have it implemented for whatever reason. Right. So, 24, signing the quotation by both parties converts it into a valid contract as per the parameters stated herein. It becomes the contract. 25, contract can be terminated with written notice to the other party. And again, this is something that we haven't really had to go into or look into, because in most cases when a contract is coming to the end, it's been known and it's been agreeable by the parties that the time has come and to call it quits. Regardless, money's owing still, as per item 21, is still owing. Last but not least, our sort of all-encompassing signing of this document and initialing of the pages. Agree that everything has been read, understood, and agreed to. And again, if they initial it, they should take responsibility for the fact that now their initials are on it. They're bound by it. So are we. So again, it works both ways. Anyways, that ends the template version of this. We'll get into a contract or rather quotation that has been put together for a particular client. The terms and conditions pretty much stay the same. That's across the board. They don't change. It's just the first 2 pages that have changed, and we'll look at that right now.
What I'm going to do now is to revisit the document and present it as it would exist prior to sending it to a client. Let's take a look.
Here now is the quotation as it would be built up for a customer, a potential customer. We're going to call him John Company, and it's John Company Enterprises, Inc. Okay, here we go. As you can see, the template has now been expanded upon in a few places. First of all, today's date, the company or the person you're going to send it to, the company you're going to send it to, and in this case, it's quotation for the year 2015 for October, and in this case, it's the 3rd quotation in October. And again, reading on further, it was a pleasure to meet with you yesterday, and based on my discussions, I go into now in this area right here, my synopsis of the application based on my notes and on my meeting with the potential customer. Goes on to this particular paragraph as well, and this one right here. And then I get into the specifics of what we're going to provide. Now, feel free to stop this particular point of the video and read this over if you wish, and you can see how I've basically customized it to suit the particular parameters of the application. Moving on down, as you can see here, we're going to provide a staff member to do QuickBooks on their computer, so it's an application out in the field, including necessary input and management of, and then I go into what we're going to be taking care of: the chart of accounts, bank account, credit card, etc., etc., etc. Again, feel free to stop the video and just have a look at that. Moving on to the next page, carries on, and again, you can see based on what I've put together here, what we're going to do. Now, I've deliberately not included our quoted price per hour, just so that I don't influence what you need to do based on your applications in your particular area. Now, again, go through and by all means read what I have opted to keep in the way of boilerplate stuff beyond the price per hour, what I've included with it, and again, you'll notice now that it's expanded to 5 pages. And basically the 3rd page now is the place for signatures and what would convert it to a valid contract if it were to take place. Moving further on down, again, the terms and conditions have stayed the same. There is no change to that whatsoever. And again, just to be fair about it, note that I have not included our price per hour just so it doesn't influence you unduly into what you need to charge for your particular application. Anyways, all the way down through to the very end, and it is now 5 pages. And for the most part, this is how it would then be converted to a PDF, then sent as an attachment to an email to the client or the prospective client. So again, it's important during your meeting to make sure that you have a proper email address to send it to. And then with a bit of follow-up, hopefully it converts into a good long-term client, customer if you would, and that everybody's aware of how things need to be done.
My recommendation to you is that you construct your own template to reflect yourself, your company, and the types of services that you have to offer. Make absolutely sure that you make the template read-only. There's nothing like filling out a template, especially if it isn't read-only, to conform to one client, and then find out that you've basically eradicated your template, and now you got to reconstruct it again, which means you got to undo that quote to your previous client and bring it back to a template state, if you would. There's an easy way to do that if you're using Word. What you do is you go back and right-click on the document wherever you have it stored in your documents, and you'll see a list. Now at the bottom of that list, what you'll see is a properties section. Click on that. And at the bottom of the next list that comes up at the bottom, you'll see a spot where you can select read only and then apply it and save it. Now you've got your template, and it'll force you to save it as something different going forward. As you create each new quote, save it in the new as a new document based on the quotation number that I discussed a little bit earlier, or by whatever method you choose. Just make it easy to retrieve if you need to. Now don't forget to change the document to a PDF before you send it off to a client or a prospective client to look at and potentially sign and come on board. I'll leave you with one final piece of advice. Don't skip this very, very important rendering of a quotation and subsequently the client contract or letter of engagement. The biggest problems that we encountered in the past in our own business was when we neglected this very important step and something came up that we had to resolve a dispute or a disagreement or whatever. When you have this thing in place, it's your proof and your fallback. There you have it. Time for you to construct your own templates and your terms and conditions and go out there and reel in those customers. All the very best of luck. I'm Herb Holst. We'll see you next time.
Fiscal Integrity Group, your home for the advancement of bookkeeping and bookkeepers.